Sometimes the only way to escape a prison is to run toward the unknown. England, 1825. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Hartley Manor in Surrey, but Lady Cecilia Hartley saw none of its beauty. She stood frozen in the small dressing room adjacent to her bedchamber, her wedding gown of ivory silk and Brussels lace hanging behind her like a shroud. In her trembling hands, she clutched a crumpled note that Margaret, her former governess and only remaining ally, had pressed into her palm mere minutes ago. "Read it quickly, my lady," Margaret had whispered, her weathered face pale with fear. "I overheard them last night in the study. Lord Fairfax and your uncle. They did not know I was in the corridor." The words on the page swam before Cecilia's eyes. Asylum, incompetent, full control of assets. The trust her mother had established before her death. The one thing that should have protected Cecilia's inheritance until her 30th birthday or marriage was to be her undoing. Once she became Lady Fairfax, her husband would petition the courts, claiming mental instability. 3 physicians were already prepared to sign the necessary documents. She would be sent away to some remote institution, and Edmund Fairfax would control everything. "Dear God," Cecilia breathed, the note slipping from her fingers. 27 years she had lived, and in those years she had endured much. The deaths of both parents within months of each other. The gradual realization that her Uncle Arthur, appointed as her guardian, cared nothing for her welfare. The announcement 6 months ago that she was to marry Lord Fairfax, a man she had met only twice, a man whose cold eyes and cruel mouth haunted her dreams. But this was beyond anything she had imagined. "You must flee, my lady," Margaret said, moving to the wardrobe with swift determination. "I have prepared a travelling dress, simple enough to draw no attention. The household is in chaos with the wedding preparations. The guests begin arriving within the hour." "Where would I go?" Cecilia asked, though even as the words left her lips, she was already moving, already shedding the heavy wedding gown. "Uncle Arthur is my legal guardian until I marry or reach 30. Any respectable family would return me immediately." "Then you must go where they cannot easily follow," Margaret replied, helping her into a modest dress of dark blue wool. "London, perhaps, or further north. You have 3 years, my lady. 3 years until the trust releases your inheritance regardless of marriage. You need only survive until then." The plan was desperate, likely doomed to failure, but as Cecilia fastened the buttons at her wrists, she felt something she had not experienced in months. Hope. However fragile, however foolish, it burned in her chest. "Your uncle will punish you for helping me," Cecilia said quietly, watching Margaret's deft fingers arrange her hair into a simple knot beneath a plain bonnet. "I am an old woman, my lady. I have lived a long life. You have barely begun yours." Margaret pressed a small purse into Cecilia's hands. "It is not much, my savings from 30 years of service, but it will see you through a few weeks if you are careful." Tears blurred Cecilia's vision. "I cannot take this." "You can, and you will." Margaret's voice broke slightly. "Your mother was kind to me when others were not. I watched you grow from a child into a woman of intelligence and compassion. I will not stand by and see you destroyed by men who view you as nothing more than a means to fortune." The sound of carriages on the gravel drive below sent both women to the window. Guests were arriving, earlier than expected. Lord Pemberton and his family, Lady Ashworth and her daughters, a dozen others, whose names and faces blurred together in Cecilia's mind. "Now, my lady. You must go now." They moved swiftly through the servants' corridors, Margaret leading the way with the confidence of one who had walked these passages for decades. The household buzzed with activity. In the kitchens, cooks shouted orders for the wedding breakfast. Footmen carried silver and crystal to the dining hall. Maids hurried past with armfuls of flowers. No one paid attention to 2 women in simple dress moving toward the rear entrance. "The stables are too risky," Margaret murmured. "Make for the eastern gate. It leads to the main road toward Kent. With fortune, you might reach the next village before they realize you are gone." At the kitchen entrance, Margaret suddenly swayed, catching herself against the doorframe with a theatrical gasp. 2 maids immediately rushed to her aid. "Mrs. Bradford, are you unwell?" "The heat," Margaret said weakly, pressing a hand to her forehead. I feel faint. Help me to my room." In the commotion of concern and assistance, Cecilia slipped through the door and into the morning air. Her heart thundered against her ribs as she walked, forcing herself not to run, across the kitchen garden and through the gap in the hedge that she and her sisters had used as children. The memory struck her with unexpected force. Her sisters were both married now, settled in their own homes, too occupied with their own lives to notice their eldest sister's distress. The eastern gate was mercifully unlocked. Beyond it stretched the road, dusty and quiet in the morning light. Cecilia glanced back once at the manor, at the only home she had ever known, and then she ran. Her boots were not made for running. Within minutes, her breath came in gasps, her legs burning with effort. Behind her, she heard shouts. They had discovered her absence faster than anticipated. The wedding was meant to begin in less than an hour. Her uncle would be furious. Fairfax would be murderous. The road curved ahead, bordered by ancient oak trees, whose branches created a canopy of green. Cecilia rounded the bend and nearly sobbed with relief. A carriage stood motionless on the roadside, its door bearing a coat of arms she recognized. The Duke of Greymont. She had never met the man, but everyone in Surrey knew his crest. The ducal estate lay some 30 miles distant in Kent. 2 men worked at the front wheel. One of the horses had lost a shoe, and the coachman was examining the hoof while a younger man, likely a groom, held the reins. Neither looked in her direction. The carriage door stood slightly ajar. The shouts behind her grew louder. Male voices now, not just servants. They were pursuing her on horseback. Cecilia did not think. She did not plan. She simply moved, darting to the carriage and pulling herself up the steps. The interior smelled of leather and wood polish and something else, something masculine and expensive. Rich burgundy upholstery, polished brass fixtures, a lap blanket folded neatly on one seat. She crawled beneath the opposite seat, pulling the travelling blanket down to conceal herself, making her body as small as possible in the narrow space. The fine dust of the floor covering filled her nose. Her dress caught on something, tearing slightly, but she hardly noticed. "Nearly done, Your Grace," she heard the coachman call. "Just needs the new shoe fitted proper." "Take your time, Davis," came a deep voice from somewhere outside. "I am in no particular hurry." The Duke himself. Cecilia pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling the sound of her ragged breathing. Through a gap in the blanket, she could see a sliver of the road. 3 riders thundered past, her uncle's stablemaster and 2 footmen. They did not slow, did not glance at the stopped carriage, assuming she must have continued ahead on foot. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Cecilia's muscles cramped in the confined space. Her heart gradually slowed its frantic pace, though fear still coiled in her stomach. What had she done? Hidden herself in a duke's private carriage like a common thief. If discovered, she would be arrested. Returned to her uncle in chains. But what choice had she possessed? "All set, Your Grace," the coachman called finally. The carriage shifted as someone climbed aboard. Not into the passenger compartment, thank God, but up to the driver's box. The vehicle lurched into motion, wheels crunching on gravel, and Cecilia closed her eyes, offering a desperate prayer to any power that might be listening. The journey became a blur of discomfort and terror. The carriage swayed and bumped over uneven roads. Twice they slowed for other vehicles to pass. Once they stopped entirely, and Cecilia heard the Duke's voice again, though she could not make out the words. Her legs went numb, her back ached. Dust and fear made her throat roar. When the carriage finally rolled to a stop and she heard the sounds of an inn-yard, horses being led away, voices calling for ostlers and stable boys, Cecilia faced a new dilemma. Should she reveal herself? Throw herself on the Duke's mercy? But what mercy could she expect from a man whose carriage she had invaded? What if he knew her uncle? What if he simply returned her, as any man of honor would? The decision was made for her when she heard footsteps approaching, heard the carriage door open. She pressed herself deeper into her hiding place, hardly daring to breathe. The door closed again. More footsteps, moving away. She was alone. For now. Slowly, painfully, Cecilia extracted herself from beneath the seat. Through the window she could see the busy courtyard of a substantial coaching inn. The sign read, "The Rose and Crown." She had no idea where they were, how far they had travelled from Hartley Manor. Her body screamed for her to flee into the crowd, to disappear among the travellers and merchants. But she had no money save what Margaret had given her, and that would not last long. She had no connections, no one to turn to. And somewhere behind them, her uncle and Lord Fairfax were searching. The Duke's voice drifted through the window, speaking with someone about fresh horses and a meal. Cecilia made her choice. She would hide here as long as possible until the carriage reached wherever it was going. Perhaps then, in a larger town or city, she would have better prospects of disappearing. She crawled back into her hiding place, pulling the blanket over herself once more, and prepared for the remainder of the journey. Margaret's worried face haunted her thoughts. By now, the wedding would have been cancelled. The guests turned away. Her uncle would be interrogating the staff, offering rewards for information. And Margaret, dear Margaret, who had risked everything to help her, what would become of her? Tears slipped down Cecilia's cheeks, but she made no sound. She had chosen this path. There was no turning back now. All she could do was hope that wherever this carriage was taking her, it would be far enough from Surrey, far enough from Lord Edmund Fairfax and his cruel plans, to give her a chance at something resembling freedom. The carriage lurched back into motion, and Lady Cecilia Hartley, who should have been married by now, who should have been dancing at her own wedding breakfast, disappeared into the unknown, hidden beneath the seat of a duke's carriage, travelling toward a future she could not begin to imagine. The afternoon light was beginning to fade when Christopher Wickliffe, Duke of Greymont, emerged from the Rose and Crown, his meal concluded and his correspondence reviewed. The inn had proven adequate, as such establishments went. Though he looked forward to reaching his own estate before nightfall, the business in London had been tedious. All contracts and solicitors and endless discussions of land rights. He preferred the relative simplicity of Greymont Hall, where his authority was absolute and his solitude assured. Davis, his coachman of 15 years, had the fresh horses harnessed and ready. Christopher approached the carriage, nodding his approval at the efficiency. As he reached for the door handle, something caught his eye. The travelling blanket, which he distinctly remembered folding and placing on the far seat that morning, was now draped haphazardly over the edge of the opposite bench. He paused, his hand still on the brass handle. The inn-yard bustled with activity around him. Merchants haggled over prices, ostlers led horses to stalls, a woman scolded a child for running too near the wheels of a mail coach. Yet Christopher's attention had narrowed to that single detail, the blanket. He was a man of precise habits, and he had not touched that blanket since departing London. With deliberate care, he opened the carriage door and stepped inside. The interior appeared undisturbed at first glance. The leather seats gleamed with their usual polish. His travel case remained secure in its place. But the blanket drew his eye again, its position all wrong. Christopher reached down and grasped the edge of the wool fabric. As he lifted it, he found himself staring into a pair of terrified green eyes. The young woman who'd been hiding beneath his seat let out a small gasp, scrambling backward against the far wall of the carriage. She was covered in dust, her dark hair escaping from what had once been a neat arrangement, her dress rumpled and torn at one sleeve. Dirt smudged her cheek and forehead. But even in her dishevelled state, even with fear radiating from every line of her body, Christopher could see she was no common traveller. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Please do not send me back." Christopher remained motionless in the doorway, his mind rapidly assessing the situation. A young woman, clearly of gentle birth despite her current state, hiding in his carriage, fleeing from something or someone. His first instinct was to summon the innkeeper, to hand this matter over to the local authorities. But something in her eyes stopped him. Not just fear, though, that was certainly present. Desperation, the look of a creature cornered with no escape. "Davis," he called without turning his head. "Take a turn around the yard. Ensure all is secure for our departure." "Yes, Your Grace," came the reply, followed by the sound of boots moving away. Christopher climbed fully into the carriage and pulled the door closed behind him. The woman pressed herself further into the corner, as though she might disappear into the upholstery if she tried hard enough. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice level and calm. "But you will explain how you came to be concealed in my carriage." She swallowed hard, her hands twisting in her lap. Christopher noted those hands. They were slender and pale, the fingers long and elegant. Not the hands of a servant or laborer. Whatever story she was about to tell him, it would contain lies. "I was fleeing," she said finally, "from my employer. He is a cruel man. He threatened me when I refused his advances. I saw your carriage stopped on the road and I hid. I am sorry. I meant no harm. If you would simply let me out here, I will trouble you no further." "Your employer," Christopher repeated, settling into the seat opposite her. "What manner of household did you serve?" "I was a companion," she said quickly, too quickly, "to an elderly lady in Surrey. But when she passed, her son inherited the estate, and he became improper in his attentions." Christopher studied her face. She met his gaze directly, which spoke of either courage or good training. Her accent was refined, her vocabulary that of an educated woman. Yet she claimed to be a paid companion, a position usually filled by impoverished gentlewomen of middling background. "A companion," he said. "Yet your dress, though travel-worn, is of fine quality. That wool is not inexpensive. And those are not the boots of a woman who must work for her bread." She flushed, her fingers stilling their anxious movement. "They were gifts. From my late mistress. She was kind to me." "I see." Christopher leaned back slightly, allowing her more space. "What is your name?" She hesitated. He could see her mind working, deciding how much truth to risk. "Cecilia," she said at last. "Miss Cecilia. Miss Cecilia of Surrey, who was a companion to a kind elderly lady who gifted her expensive clothing." Christopher's tone was dry. "You will forgive me if I find your tale somewhat lacking in credibility." Tears gathered in her eyes, though she blinked them back with determination. "I am telling you the truth, perhaps not all of it, but what I have said is not a lie. I had to flee. I had no choice. If you return me to Surrey, I will be destroyed." The raw honesty in that final statement gave Christopher pause. Whatever her full story might be, he believed that much. She was genuinely afraid. Not of him, at least not primarily, but of something or someone behind her. "I do not make a habit of destroying young women," he said. "Nor do I make a habit of harboring runaways in my carriage. You have placed me in an awkward position, Miss Cecilia." "I know." Her voice was barely audible. "I am sorry, truly. I was desperate. I thought I could hide until we reached a town, somewhere larger where I might disappear." Christopher considered his options. He could deposit her here at the inn, wash his hands of the matter entirely. It would be the sensible course. Whatever trouble she had embroiled herself in was not his concern. Yet something about her bearing, the way she held herself despite her obvious terror, reminded him of someone. His mother, perhaps, in her final years, when his father's cruelty had stripped away everything but her dignity. "I am travelling to Greymont Hall in Kent," he said finally. "It is my estate. I will take you as far as the next substantial town, where you may arrange for proper transportation to wherever you wish to go. In the meantime, you will sit on that seat, properly visible, and you will not make any sudden movements that might alarm my coachman. Is that understood?" Relief flooded her features. "Yes, thank you. Your Grace, I assume." "Indeed." He rapped on the ceiling, signalling Davis. The carriage lurched into motion moments later. They travelled in silence for several miles. Christopher observed her covertly, noting details. The way she held her hands, folded neatly despite their trembling. The straightness of her spine even in exhaustion. The quality of her speech when she had spoken. Everything about her suggested good breeding, careful education, the kind of upbringing reserved for daughters of the gentry at minimum. "Are you hungry?" he asked eventually, producing a small package from his travel case. The inn provided bread and cheese for the journey. She stared at the offered food as though it might vanish if she reached for it. I have not eaten since last night, she admitted quietly. Then eat. He handed her the package, along with a clean handkerchief. Though you might wish to wipe your face first, you have collected half the road dust in Surrey on your cheek. A ghost of a smile crossed her face as she accepted the handkerchief. I must look frightful. You look like a woman who has been hiding beneath a carriage seat for the better part of a day, Christopher replied. Which is to say, yes, frightful. She laughed then, a small, surprised sound that transformed her features. Cleaned of dust and relaxed from immediate fear, she was quite lovely. Not in the conventional way of debutantes and society beauties, but with an intelligence in her eyes and a strength in her jaw that suggested character. As she ate the bread and cheese with careful, small bites, Christopher found himself curious despite his better judgment. You mentioned Surrey. What part? She hesitated mid-bite. Near Guildford, she said finally. Why do you ask? I have holdings in that region. I wondered if we might have mutual acquaintances. Her face paled slightly. I do not move in elevated circles, Your Grace. A paid companion has little social standing. Yet you speak French, Christopher observed, switching to that language. Your accent is excellent. Where did you learn? She froze, caught. After a moment, she replied in equally fluent French. My mistress believed in education. She employed a tutor. How generous of her. Christopher switched back to English. To employ a French tutor for her companion. Most unusual. Cecilia set down the remainder of the bread. Her appetite apparently fled. You do not believe me. I believe you are in trouble, Christopher said. I believe you are fleeing from something or someone. I believe you are frightened. But I do not believe you were a paid companion, Miss Cecilia. The question is whether your deception matters to me. She met his gaze then, really met it, and he saw something fierce beneath the fear. It should not matter to you at all. You will leave me in the next town, I will disappear, and you will forget you ever saw me. My troubles need not become yours. A sensible observation, Christopher agreed. But even as he spoke, he knew he would not simply abandon her. Whether from curiosity, chivalry, or simple human decency, he had involved himself the moment he had pulled back that blanket. The sun set as they travelled, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Cecilia dozed fitfully in her corner, exhaustion finally claiming her despite her obvious attempts to remain alert. Christopher watched her sleep and wondered what he had gotten himself into. They reached Greymont Hall as twilight deepened into true darkness. The estate rose before them, its stone walls and tall windows gleaming with lamplight. Home. Christopher felt the familiar easing of tension that always came when he passed through his gates. Cecilia woke as the carriage slowed, blinking in confusion before memory returned. She looked out at the imposing structure of the hall with wide eyes. This is where you live? It is. Christopher opened the door as a footman rushed forward. Come. I will have my housekeeper prepare a room for you. Your Grace, I cannot impose, she began. But he cut her off with a raised hand. You have already imposed considerably, Miss Cecilia. A night's shelter and a proper meal will allow you to regain your strength. We can discuss your onward journey in the morning. She had little choice but to accept. Christopher led her into the grand entrance hall, where Mrs. Thornbury, his housekeeper of 20 years, awaited with her usual impeccable timing. Mrs. Thornbury, we have an unexpected guest. Please prepare the blue room and see that Miss Cecilia has everything she requires. Some of the late Duchess's clothing may fit her. If Mrs. Thornbury was surprised by the arrival of a dishevelled young woman with no luggage, she gave no sign of it. Of course, Your Grace. Miss, if you will follow me. Cecilia hesitated, looking back at Christopher with an expression he could not quite read. Gratitude mixed with apprehension, perhaps. Thank you, she said softly. For your kindness. Save your thanks until morning, Christopher replied. We have matters to discuss. He watched her follow Mrs. Thornbury up the grand staircase, noting how her steps slowed as exhaustion pulled at her. Whatever story she was hiding, whatever circumstances had driven her to such desperate measures, he would discover the truth. But tonight, he would allow her to rest. In his study later, with a glass of brandy warming in his hand. Christopher stared into the fire and thought of green eyes filled with terror and determination, thought of elegant hands that had never known labour, thought of a woman who spoke fluent French and held herself like nobility but claimed to be a servant. He thought, too, of the instinct that had made him help her rather than turn her over to the authorities, the same instinct that whispered she would bring nothing but complication into his orderly life. For once, Christopher Wycliffe chose not to listen to common sense. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tonight, he had offered sanctuary to a stranger, and he found he did not regret it. The blue room in which Cecilia woke possessed more luxury than she had known in her entire life at Hartley Manor. Morning sunlight streamed through tall windows draped in silk, illuminating furniture of polished mahogany and walls papered in delicate patterns of cream and gold. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned in a rush. The flight, the carriage, the Duke. She sat up slowly, noting the clean nightgown someone had laid out, the washing basin with fresh water, the tray of breakfast foods that had been delivered while she slept. Her own dress had been taken away, replaced by a simple but elegant day dress in soft grey. The late Duchess's clothing, Mrs. Thornbury had said. Cecilia ran her fingers over the fine fabric and wondered what manner of woman the previous Duchess of Greymont had been. A soft knock at the door announced the housekeeper herself. "Good morning, miss. I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you." Cecilia stood, suddenly conscious of her uncertain position. "I should speak with the Duke. I have imposed long enough on his hospitality. His Grace is in the library, miss, if you would follow me." The library proved to be a magnificent room, 2 stories tall with shelves reaching toward a painted ceiling. Books lined every wall, their leather spines creating a tapestry of colours. Christopher stood by one of the tall windows, a letter in his hand, but he turned as Mrs. Thornbury announced her. "Miss Cecilia, I trust you are recovered from yesterday's ordeal." "I am, Your Grace, and I owe you my deepest gratitude for your kindness." She hesitated, then continued, "I will not trouble you further. If you could direct me to the nearest coaching inn, I will arrange my onward journey." He studied her for a long moment. "And where do you intend to go?" "North," she said vaguely. "I have distant connections who may provide assistance." "More deceptions." His voice held no anger, merely observation. "You have no connections, do you? No money beyond what little you carry? No plan beyond running as far from Surrey as possible?" The accuracy of his assessment stung. "That is my concern, not yours." "Perhaps." He set down the letter and moved to a nearby desk. "However, I find myself curious. 3 days, Miss Cecilia. Grant me 3 days to satisfy my curiosity, and in return, I will provide you with funds sufficient to establish yourself wherever you choose to go." She stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because I suspect you are running from something genuinely dangerous, and I do not make a habit of sending young women into peril without resources." He gestured to the shelves around them. "In the meantime, I have correspondence that requires organization. My late wife's papers specifically. They are in French and Latin, and my own knowledge of those languages is adequate but not fluent. If you truly were a companion, you must have some skill at such tasks." It was a test, Cecilia realized. He was offering her a way to remain while he investigated her story. "I can read both French and Latin," she said carefully. "My education was thorough. Then we have an arrangement." He indicated a smaller desk near the window. "The papers are there. Sort them by date and subject. I will be working at my own desk should you require assistance." The next 3 days fell into an unexpected pattern. Each morning, Cecilia arrived in the library to find new stacks of correspondence waiting. She worked methodically, her translations careful and precise. Christopher, true to his word, maintained his own work at the larger desk, though she often felt his gaze upon her. They spoke little at first, their exchanges limited to necessary questions about the documents. But gradually, in the quiet hours of the afternoon, when the household settled into its routines, conversation began to flow more naturally. "Your wife collected quite extensive correspondence," Cecilia observed on the second day, setting aside a particularly lengthy letter from a Parisian acquaintance. Caroline had friends across Europe, Christopher replied. She was more social than I am. She found Greymont Hall rather isolating, I think, though she never complained directly. Something in his tone made Cecilia look up. You miss her? I miss the idea of what we might have become. He set down his pen, his expression distant. Ours was an arranged marriage. Our families had been negotiating the match since we were children. We were cordial to one another, respectful, but we never achieved what one might call affection. She died of a fever 4 years ago, and I regret that we did not have more time to see if something deeper might have developed. The honesty surprised her. I am sorry for your loss. And I for yours. You mentioned deceased parents yesterday. Cecilia's hands stilled on the papers before her. My father was Viscount Hartley. He died 2 years ago. My mother some months before him. They were devoted to one another. When she passed, I think he simply lost the will to continue. It was the truth, or at least part of it, and speaking it aloud brought unexpected relief. For months, she had carried her grief in silence, her uncle viewing any display of emotion as unseemly weakness. That must have been difficult, Christopher said quietly, to lose both parents so close together. It was the loneliness that proved hardest, Cecilia admitted. My sisters married young and well. They have their own households now, their own concerns. I became little more than an obligation to my uncle, a ward to be dealt with as expediently as possible. She had said too much. Christopher's attention sharpened immediately. Your uncle, would that be Lord Arthur Hartley? Her breath caught. You know him? I know of him. He has a reputation for gaming, though we do not move in the same circles. Christopher rose from his desk and crossed to stand before her. What else have you not told me, Miss Cecilia? Or should I say, Lady Cecilia Hartley? The game was over. She could see it in his eyes, in the way he regarded her with both understanding and concern. How did you know? Your accent, your bearing, the quality of your education. But primarily this. He picked up one of the letters she had been translating. You read this correspondence from Caroline's cousin with perfect comprehension of nuances that would elude most translators. That level of education is reserved for daughters of the nobility. Cecilia stood, unable to remain seated under his scrutiny. Very well. Yes, I am Cecilia Hartley, daughter of the late Viscount. Are you satisfied? Far from it. Why did Lord Hartley arrange a marriage for you to flee from? Most guardians consider suitable matches a blessing, not a burden to escape. The concern in his voice, the genuine desire to understand rather than condemn, broke through the walls she had built around her fear. Because Lord Fairfax promised to solve my uncle's financial difficulties in exchange for my hand, and because once we were married, Fairfax planned to have me declared incompetent and confined to an asylum so he might control my mother's inheritance. She watched Christopher's expression darken as she explained what Margaret had overheard. The trust that should have protected her, the physicians already prepared to sign false documents. As the words poured out, relief and terror mingled in equal measure. Margaret, she said, her voice breaking slightly. She was my governess, the only person in that house who cared for my welfare. She helped me escape, created a distraction so I might flee. But my uncle will have questioned her. If he suspects she aided me, he might dismiss her without reference, or worse. She is not young, Your Grace. Without a position, she has nowhere to go. Christopher listened without interruption, his face growing grimmer with each revelation. When she finally fell silent, he moved to pour wine from a decanter on the side table, pressing a glass into her trembling hands. Drink, he commanded gently. You are shaking. She obeyed, the wine burning warmth down her throat. I should not have burdened you with this. It is not your concern. It became my concern when I found you in my carriage, Christopher replied. Lord Fairfax, I have heard whispers about him, though nothing substantiated. Rumours of cruelty, of wives who died under mysterious circumstances. If what you say is true, he is a dangerous man. What I say is true, Cecilia insisted. Margaret would not have risked everything on idle gossip. Ooh. Christopher paced to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. She could see him weighing options, calculating risks. When he turned back, his expression had set into lines of determination. "I will make inquiries," he said, discreetly, "about Fairfax, about your uncle's financial situation, and about Margaret's current circumstances. You will remain here at Greymont as my guest until I can verify your account and determine the best course of action." "You believe me?" She had not dared to hope for that. "I believe you are genuinely frightened, and I believe the basic facts of your story. Whether the full truth is as dire as you fear remains to be determined." He paused, then added, "I will not return you to your uncle's custody without absolute certainty of your safety. You have my word on that." Gratitude threatened to overwhelm her composure. "Why are you helping me? You owe me nothing. Indeed, I have brought nothing but complication into your household." Something flickered in Christopher's eyes, an emotion she could not quite identify. "Perhaps I am tired of living a life governed entirely by duty and propriety. Or perhaps I simply recognize in you a desperation I once felt myself when my father attempted to control every aspect of my existence." Considerate sympathy between prisoners of circumstance. Before she could respond, a sharp knock sounded at the library door. Mrs. Thornbury entered, her usually composed features showing signs of agitation. "Forgive the interruption, Your Grace, but an urgent letter has arrived." The messenger said it was a matter requiring immediate attention. Christopher took the sealed envelope, his eyes scanning the direction with visible displeasure. "From Surrey. The seal is Lord Hartley's." Cecilia felt the blood drain from her face. "He has found me." "No." Christopher broke the seal and read quickly, his jaw tightening with each line. "He is searching for you. He offers a substantial reward for information regarding your whereabouts, claiming you fled in a state of mental distress and require immediate return for your own protection and medical treatment." "Medical treatment," Cecilia repeated bitterly. "He means confinement, the asylum Fairfax spoke of." Christopher's eyes met hers over the letter. "He describes you as unstable, given to fits of hysteria and irrational behavior. He claims to be beside himself with worry for your welfare. And you? Do you believe his characterization?" "I believe," Christopher said slowly, folding the letter with deliberate care, "that I have just spent 3 days observing you work with meticulous attention to detail, translate complex correspondence with perfect accuracy, and conduct yourself with remarkable composure given your circumstances. You do not present as a woman suffering from mental instability." Relief made her dizzy. "Then you will not send me back?" "I will not." He set the letter aside, as though it were of no consequence. "But this changes matters. Your uncle knows you fled eastward. He will be making inquiries at every coaching inn and estate between Surrey and the coast. We must be strategic in how we proceed." "I could leave," Cecilia offered, though the thought of returning to the road alone terrified her. "Tonight, before he thinks to search here." "And go where? With what resources?" Christopher shook his head firmly. "No. You will remain at Greymont while I investigate the full circumstances. I have connections in London, solicitors who can verify the existence and terms of your mother's trust. I also have means of discovering what became of your Margaret without alerting your uncle to my involvement." "You would do that?" "Truly." Tears gathered in her eyes despite her efforts to contain them. "You would help me discover if she is safe." "I would, and I will." His voice softened slightly. "No one who risks so much for another should be left in uncertainty about the consequences. If Margaret requires assistance, I am in a position to provide it." For the first time since fleeing Hartley Manor, Cecilia felt something beyond mere survival instinct. Hope, fragile and tentative, but undeniably present. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know how I shall ever repay such kindness." "Repayment is not required." Christopher moved toward the door, then paused. "Rest assured, Lady Cecilia, you are under my protection now. Neither your uncle nor Lord Fairfax will find you here. You have my word as the Duke of Greymont." As he departed to begin his inquiries, Cecilia sank into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. She had fled one prison only to find sanctuary in the most unexpected place. The Duke of Graymont, cold and remote by reputation, had proven to be something she had not anticipated. An ally, perhaps even a friend. And for the first time in 2 years, since her parents' deaths had left her vulnerable to her uncle's mercenary schemes, Cecilia Hartley allowed herself to believe that escape might truly be possible. Christopher departed for London before dawn 3 days later, informing only Mrs. Thornbury of his true purpose. To the rest of the household, he claimed business with his solicitors, a common enough occurrence to raise no suspicion. Cecilia watched his carriage disappear down the drive from the library window, anxiety knotting her stomach despite his assurances that she would remain safe at Graymont. The city streets of London bustled with their usual chaos when Christopher arrived late that afternoon. Merchants hawked their wares, carriages jostled for position on narrow lanes, and the smell of coal smoke hung heavy in the air. He made his way directly to the offices of Whitmore and Associates in Lincoln's Inn Fields, where the late Viscount Hartley's legal affairs had been managed for 3 generations. Mr. Edwin Whitmore, a distinguished gentleman of perhaps 60 years, received the Duke with appropriate deference, though his expression held curiosity. It was not every day that a Duke appeared without appointment to inquire about the affairs of a deceased Viscount. "Your Grace, what an unexpected honour. How may I be of service?" Christopher settled into the offered chair, declining refreshment. "I require information about the estate of the late Viscount Hartley, specifically regarding any trusts established for his daughter, Lady Cecilia Hartley." Whitmore's eyebrows rose fractionally. "That is a rather unusual request, Your Grace. Might I inquire as to your interest in the matter?" "Lady Cecilia is currently a guest at my estate," Christopher replied, his tone brooking no argument. "She has fled circumstances she believes threaten her welfare. Before I can properly assist her, I must understand the full legal situation." The solicitor studied him for a long moment, then rose to retrieve a leather-bound file from the cabinet behind his desk. "The late Viscountess Hartley, Lady Margaret Hartley, established a trust for her daughter in the year 1820. The trust contains the entirety of Lady Margaret's considerable inheritance from her own father, the Earl of Denham. The sum is substantial, approximately £30,000 in various investments and properties." Christopher's jaw tightened. £30,000, a fortune that would make any woman an attractive target. And the terms of release. The trust releases upon Lady Cecilia's marriage, at which point control transfers to her husband, or upon her 30th birthday, when she gains independent control. Whitmore adjusted his spectacles. "Lord Hartley, as her legal guardian following the Viscount's death, has attempted several times to contest these terms, arguing that such a sum requires masculine oversight regardless of Lady Cecilia's age. Unsuccessfully, I presume." "Indeed. The Viscountess was quite explicit in her wishes, and the trust is ironclad. However, there is one provision that concerns me greatly." Whitmore's expression darkened. "Should Lady Cecilia be declared legally incompetent by medical authority, control of the trust would transfer to her guardian until such time as she recovered her faculties." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. "And Lord Hartley has arranged her marriage to Lord Edmund Fairfax. I learned of the betrothal through social channels, yes. A most unsuitable match, in my professional opinion, though I was not consulted." Whitmore leaned forward. "Your Grace, I must speak plainly. Lord Fairfax's financial circumstances are dire. He has married twice before, and both wives died within 2 years of their weddings, under circumstances that raised whispers, though no formal investigation was ever conducted. In each case, Lord Fairfax inherited substantial estates. And you believe Lady Cecilia would face similar danger?" "I believe Lady Cecilia possesses a fortune that makes her vulnerable to unscrupulous men, and that her uncle has proven himself willing to prioritize his own financial difficulties over her welfare." Whitmore closed the file. "If she has sought your protection, Your Grace, I would counsel you to provide it." Christopher rose, his decision crystallizing. "Can you provide me with documentation of the trust's terms? I may have need of legal evidence should circumstances require it." "Of course, I shall prepare copies immediately." Whitmore hesitated, then added, "There is one other matter. A woman came to my office 3 days ago asking after Lady Cecilia. She gave her name as Margaret Bradford, claiming to have been in the Hartley household service. She seemed most distressed about Lady Cecilia's disappearance. Did she leave word where she might be found? She mentioned taking temporary refuge with her sister in Cheapside, though she provided no specific direction. She feared Lord Hartley would dismiss her without reference if he suspected her of aiding Lady Cecilia's flight. Christopher committed the information to memory. If she returns, tell her that Lady Cecilia is safe and that she need not fear for her own security. Tell her the Duke of Greymont will ensure her welfare. Leaving Whitmore's office with the necessary documents secured in his coat, Christopher turned his attention to locating Margaret Bradford. Cheapside was a district of merchants and shopkeepers, respectable but crowded. Finding one woman without a specific address would prove difficult, but Christopher had resources beyond his own efforts. He dispatched 3 trusted men with instructions to make discreet inquiries. By evening, one returned with promising information. A Margaret Bradford had been observed at St. Mary Le Bow Church, seeking counsel from the vicar about employment prospects. The vicar had directed her to his sister's household in nearby Coleman Street, where a position as housekeeper might be available. Christopher found the modest townhouse as twilight settled over the city. Margaret Bradford answered his knock herself, her weathered face showing surprise and wariness at the sight of a gentleman of obvious rank on the doorstep. "Mrs. Bradford? I am Christopher Wickliffe, Duke of Greymont. Might I have a word regarding Lady Cecilia Hartley?" The colour drained from her face. "Is she well?" "Please, Your Grace, if you know anything of her whereabouts, I must know if she reached safety." "She did. She is currently residing at my estate in Kent, under my protection." Christopher watched relief transform her features. "I should like to hear what you know of the circumstances that led to her flight." Margaret invited him into the small parlour, where she recounted everything she had overheard. The conversation between Lord Hartley and Lord Fairfax in the study, their discussion of physicians prepared to sign commitment papers, the asylum in Yorkshire, where Fairfax intended to confine his new wife while he controlled her fortune. Her voice shook as she described creating the distraction that had allowed Cecilia to escape. "I knew they would suspect me," she said quietly. "Lord Hartley dismissed me that very afternoon, claiming I had failed in my duties. He offered no reference, no compensation beyond what wages I was owed. But I would do it again, Your Grace. Lady Cecilia is a good woman. She deserves better than to be used and discarded by men who see her only as a means to fortune." Christopher studied the older woman, seeing the genuine affection and concern in her eyes. "You risked everything for her. She is the daughter of my heart, if not my blood. Her mother was kind to me when I was young and in desperate straits. I have spent 30 years in that household. Helping Lady Cecilia escape was the least I could do to honour Lady Margaret's memory. Then allow me to honour your loyalty." Christopher withdrew a purse from his coat. "This should see you through several months until suitable employment can be found. I will also provide a letter of reference attesting to your character and capabilities. And if you wish it, there is a position available at Greymont Hall. My housekeeper, Mrs. Thornbury, could use an assistant, and Lady Cecilia would benefit from a familiar face." Tears gathered in Margaret's eyes. "Your Grace, I do not know what to say." "Say you will accept. Lady Cecilia has been greatly concerned about your welfare. Knowing you are safe will ease her mind considerably." Or, as Christopher made his way back to his London townhouse for the night, preparing to return to Greymont the following day, he felt a grim satisfaction. The pieces of Cecilia's story had been verified. She had told him the truth, and the danger she faced was very real. He would protect her. The decision had ceased to be merely a matter of chivalry. Somewhere in the past days of conversation and quiet companionship in the library, Cecilia Hartley had become more than a stranger in need of assistance. She had become someone he found himself thinking about at odd hours, someone whose smile brightened rooms, someone whose safety mattered to him in ways he was not yet prepared to examine too closely. At Greymont Hall, Cecilia passed the days in an agony of waiting. She maintained her work in the library, organising correspondence and translation documents, but her attention wandered constantly to the window, watching for the Duke's return. Mrs. Thornbury provided what comfort she could, but even the housekeeper's calm presence could not entirely ease Cecilia's anxiety. On the afternoon of the second day, the sound of horses and carriage wheels on the gravel drive sent her heart racing. But it was not the Duke's familiar equipage that appeared. Instead, two travel-worn carriages, bearing no identifying crests, rolled to a stop before the main entrance. From the library window, Cecilia watched with growing horror as two men descended. Her Uncle Arthur, his face red with exertion and anger, and beside him, Lord Edmund Fairfax, tall and imposing in his dark coat, his expression cold as winter frost. "No," she whispered, backing away from the window. "They have found me." She heard raised voices in the entrance hall, her uncle's demanding tone carrying through the thick walls. Mrs. Thornbury's calmer responses, firm but courteous. Then footsteps approaching the library. Cecilia fled to the far corner, positioning herself behind one of the tall bookshelves, her heart thundering so loudly she was certain it could be heard throughout the house. The library door opened, and Mrs. Thornbury appeared, her expression carefully neutral. "Lord Hartley and Lord Fairfax request an audience regarding a matter of some urgency," she said to the apparently empty room. "I have informed them that His Grace is not currently in residence." "That is most inconvenient," came her uncle's voice from the hallway. "We shall wait in the drawing room until he returns. This matter concerns His Grace directly." "I am afraid that would not be appropriate, my lord." His Grace left no instruction to receive visitors in his absence. "Dash propriety, woman. We are searching for my ward, Lady Cecilia Hartley. She has fled her home in a state of mental distress, and we have reason to believe she may have sought refuge here." Cecilia pressed her hand to her mouth, terror and fury warring within her. Mental distress. The lies had already begun. "I can assure you, my lord, that no Lady Cecilia resides at Greymont Hall." Mrs. Thornbury's voice remained steady, but Cecilia heard the slight emphasis on the word resides, a clever truth that was not quite a lie. "Then you will not object to allowing us to search the premises?" Fairfax's voice cut in, smooth and dangerous. "For Lady Cecilia's own protection, you understand. She is not well. She requires immediate medical attention." "I most certainly will object, Lord Fairfax. This is the Duke of Greymont's private residence, and I will not permit strangers to wander through it unchecked. If you wish to make inquiries, you may leave your card, and His Grace will respond when he returns." "Now see here," her uncle blustered. "I am Lady Cecilia's legal guardian. I have every right—" "You have no rights whatsoever on the Duke of Greymont's property," Mrs. Thornbury interrupted, with steel in her tone. "I must ask you both to depart, immediately." "This is not finished," Fairfax said softly, and something in his voice made Cecilia's blood run cold. "We will return with proper authorities if necessary. Lady Cecilia belongs with her family, and I will see her return to where she belongs." The sounds of departure followed, carriage wheels on gravel, horses being urged into motion. But Cecilia remained frozen in her hiding place, shaking with reaction. They had come for her. They had found her, and they would return. Christopher's protection suddenly seemed fragile as glass against the determination she had heard in Fairfax's voice. She was still standing rigid behind the bookshelf when the library door opened again. This time it was Christopher who entered, travel dust still on his coat, his expression grim. "Cecilia," he called softly. "Mrs. Thornbury informed me of our visitors. You can come out now. They are gone." She emerged from her hiding place on unsteady legs. "They will return. Lord Fairfax threatened to bring authorities." "Let him try." Christopher crossed to her in 3 long strides, his hands settling on her shoulders with gentle firmness. "I have spoken with your solicitor. I know about the trust, about the provision regarding mental incompetence, about Fairfax's previous wives. Everything you told me has been verified. And Margaret," the question escaped before she could contain it, "is safe. I found her in London. She confirmed your account in every particular, and she sends her love. I have offered her a position here at Greymont, if she wishes to accept it." His thumbs brushed across her shoulders in an unconscious gesture of comfort. "You are not alone in this, Cecilia. I will not allow them to take you. You cannot simply refuse my uncle. He is my legal guardian." Her voice trembled despite her efforts to control it. Your uncle is a man who has demonstrated appalling judgment and questionable morals. I am the Duke of Greymont. My authority in this county is considerable. Christopher's grey eyes blazed with determination. More than that, I have secured documentation proving the terms of your mother's trust and evidence suggesting Fairfax's intentions are precisely as you described. If they return with authorities, I will be prepared. Relief threatened to overwhelm her composure. Why are you doing this? You have known me barely a week. This trouble, this risk to your reputation. Perhaps, Christopher said quietly, his hands still warm on her shoulders. I am simply tired of watching injustice go unchallenged. Or perhaps I have discovered that I am not quite as content with isolation as I believed myself to be. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them. Not friendship precisely, though that was certainly present. Something deeper, more complicated, charged with possibilities neither was yet ready to name. The moment was broken by Mrs. Thornbury's discreet knock at the door. Your Grace, forgive the interruption. A letter has arrived from Lord Hartley. It appears to be a formal demand for Lady Cecilia's return. Christopher released Cecilia's shoulders with visible reluctance. I shall draft an equally formal refusal. Cecilia, you should rest. This ordeal has clearly taxed your strength, but as Cecilia left the library, she felt stronger than she had in months. Christopher believed her. More than that, he was prepared to stand between her and those who would see her destroyed. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she was not facing her battles alone. Christopher requested Cecilia's presence in his study the morning after Margaret's arrival at Greymont Hall. The older woman had travelled from London in the Duke's own carriage, arriving late the previous evening to Cecilia's tearful embrace and profound relief. Now, as Cecilia entered the masculine space of leather chairs and mahogany furniture, she found Christopher standing by the window, his expression grave. Please sit, he said, gesturing to one of the chairs before his desk. We must discuss your situation with complete honesty. Cecilia settled into the offered seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The past days had been a storm of emotion, from terror at her uncle's appearance to joy at Margaret's safe arrival. But she had sensed Christopher's growing concern, the way his jaw tightened when he thought she was not looking. I have spoken with Mr. Whitmore, your family's solicitor, Christopher began without preamble. The trust your mother established contains £30,000 in various investments and properties, a considerable fortune by any measure. Cecilia nodded slowly. I knew it was substantial, though the exact sum was never disclosed to me. The terms are clear. Upon your marriage, control transfers to your husband. Upon your 30th birthday, you gain independent control. However, there is a provision that concerns me greatly. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Should you be declared legally incompetent by medical authority, control would transfer immediately to your guardian. My uncle, Cecilia whispered, until I marry or reach 30. Precisely, and therein lies the trap Fairfax and your uncle have constructed. Once you were married to Fairfax, he would have you committed, declared incompetent, and gain full control of your fortune while you languished in some remote institution. Christopher's voice hardened. Mr. Whitmore also confirmed that Fairfax has married twice before. Both wives died within 2 years under circumstances that raised questions but never formal investigation. In each case, he inherited substantial estates. The room seemed to tilt around her. He would have killed me. Eventually, yes. I believe that was his intention. Christopher moved to pour brandy from the decanter on his desk, pressing the glass into her cold hands. Drink. You have gone pale. She obeyed, the liquid burning down her throat, bringing warmth and clarity. Then what am I to do? I have 3 years until I reach 30. 3 years of hiding, of running, of never knowing when my uncle might find me and force me back into Fairfax's custody. Christopher returned to his desk, his fingers drumming once against the polished wood before stilling. There is a solution. One that would protect you immediately and permanently. What solution could possibly... She stopped, understanding dawning as she saw the resolve in his eyes. No, you cannot mean... Marriage, he said simply, to me, a marriage of convenience and protection. Once you are wed to me, your uncle's guardianship ends, Fairfax's claims become invalid, and the trust transfers according to its terms. You would have control of your own fortune, your own life. Cecilia rose abruptly, the brandy sloshing in her glass. Your Grace, I cannot ask such a sacrifice of you. Marriage is not a temporary arrangement. It would bind you to me for life. I am aware of what marriage entails, Christopher replied dryly. I have been married before, if you recall. Then you know what you would be giving up. The possibility of a true marriage, of love, of heirs. She set down the glass with a sharp click. I will not trap you into such an arrangement to save myself. Christopher stood as well, moving around the desk to face her directly. You would not be trapping me. I am offering freely. And as for what I would be giving up, I had no intention of marrying again. My first marriage was cordial but cold. I have no desire to repeat the experience with someone I barely know, someone chosen for political or financial advantage. But with me, you would know exactly what you were getting, Cecilia said bitterly. A woman fleeing scandal, bringing nothing but complications. I would know that I was protecting someone who deserves protection, Christopher corrected. I would know that I was preventing a grave injustice, and I would know that I was entering into an arrangement with a woman whose company I have come to value greatly these past days. The gentleness in his tone nearly undid her composure. What would you ask of me in return? Nothing beyond what you are comfortable providing. We would maintain separate chambers. You would have complete freedom to manage your affairs as you see fit once the trust transfers. I would expect you to serve as hostess when entertaining is necessary. But beyond the social requirements of the position, you would be free to live your life as you choose. A marriage in name only, Cecilia said quietly. If that is your preference, yes. Something flickered in Christopher's eyes, an emotion she could not quite identify. I am not a cruel man, Cecilia. I would never force attentions upon you. This arrangement would exist solely to protect you from those who would do you harm. She turned away, moving to the window where morning light streamed across the manicured grounds of Greymont. The alternative stretched before her with stark clarity. Years of hiding, of fear, of never feeling safe, or a marriage to a man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, who asked nothing of her beyond basic courtesy. If I accept, she said slowly, what would the arrangement entail? I would obtain a special license through the Archbishop. We could marry within days, quietly, with minimal witnesses. My solicitors would immediately transfer the trust into your control as a married woman. Your uncle would have no grounds to contest it, as you would no longer be under his guardianship, and Lord Fairfax would have no claim whatsoever. You would be the Duchess of Greymont, under my protection, with your own fortune secured. Christopher paused. There is one other consideration. Margaret has confirmed everything you told me. She overheard the conversation between your uncle and Fairfax. Her testimony, combined with the documentation I have secured, would be sufficient to bring serious questions about Fairfax's character before the proper authorities, should it become necessary. Cecilia pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. Every rational thought screamed that this was madness. Yet what other choice existed? Return to her uncle, flee and hope £30,000 would remain secure through 3 years of legal manoeuvring. Trust that Fairfax would simply abandon his pursuit. You would truly do this? She asked. Bind yourself to me, a woman you have known barely more than a week, for no reason beyond preventing injustice. I would. Christopher's reflection appeared in the glass beside hers. I have spent 4 years in isolation, Cecilia, convinced that was what I preferred. These past days have reminded me that solitude and peace are not the same thing. If I can provide you with security while gaining a companion whose mind I respect and whose presence I enjoy, it seems a fair exchange. She turned to face him, seeing the sincerity in his grey eyes. Then I accept, with gratitude and the promise that I will never be a burden to you. You could never be that, he said softly. The special license arrived 2 days later, procured through Christopher's connections with remarkable speed. The wedding was arranged for the following morning in Greymont's private chapel, with only Mrs. Thornbury, Margaret, and the local vicar as witnesses. Cecilia dressed in a simple gown of pale blue silk, one of the late Duchess's garments that Mrs. Thornbury had altered to fit her. Margaret arranged her hair with gentle hands, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Your mother would be proud of you," the older woman whispered. "You have shown such courage, my dear girl." "I feel like a fraud," Cecilia admitted. "Marrying a duke to escape my circumstances. What does that make me?" "It makes you a survivor," Margaret replied firmly. "And His Grace is a good man. I have watched him these past days. He looks at you with kindness, with respect. There are worse foundations for a marriage." The chapel was small and ancient, its stone walls dating back centuries. Morning light filtered through stained glass, painting colours across the worn flagstones. Christopher stood waiting before the altar, dressed in dark blue superfine and grey waistcoat, his expression carefully neutral. As Cecilia walked down the short aisle, their eyes met, and she saw something flicker in his face. Not love, certainly. They barely knew one another, but perhaps recognition. Two people choosing an unconventional path to escape the prisons others had built for them. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. The vicar's words about love and commitment seemed to hang in the air with uncomfortable weight. Cecilia's hands trembled as Christopher slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Christopher's lips brushed her cheek in the briefest of kisses, proper and chaste. "It is done," he murmured for her ears alone. "You are safe now." The legal work began immediately. Christopher's solicitor, a Mr. Pemberton who had travelled from London for the occasion, presented the necessary documents. With Cecilia's signature as Duchess of Greymont, the trust released, transferring full control of her mother's fortune into her hands as a married woman. "Your affairs are now entirely your own, Your Grace," Mr. Pemberton said, using her new title with appropriate deference. "The investments are sound, the properties well maintained. I have prepared a complete accounting for your review." Cecilia stared at the papers before her, at her new signature, at the freedom those documents represented. She was no longer Lady Cecilia Hartley, ward and victim. She was the Duchess of Greymont, with £30,000 and the protection of one of England's most powerful titles. Lord Hartley arrived at Greymont that very afternoon, as though he had been watching for just such a development. Christopher received him in the drawing room, with Cecilia seated beside him, her new wedding band visible on her left hand. "This is outrageous," her uncle sputtered, his face florid with rage. "You have stolen my ward, married her, without my consent." "Your ward?" Christopher's voice was dangerously quiet. "Lady Cecilia ceased to be your ward the moment we married. As for consent, she is 7 and 20, well past the age of requiring permission for marriage. She is not in her right mind. She fled her home, her responsibilities. She fled a forced marriage to a man who intended to have her committed to an asylum," Cecilia interrupted, her voice steadier than she had expected. "A man whose previous wives died under suspicious circumstances. I will not apologize for choosing survival." Hartley's eyes narrowed. "You have no proof of such wild accusations." "On the contrary," Christopher said, producing a folder of documents. "I have testimony from Mrs. Margaret Bradford, who overheard your conversation with Lord Fairfax discussing the asylum plan. I have documentation of the trust terms and the provision regarding incompetence. And I have begun inquiries into the deaths of Fairfax's previous wives. Shall I continue?" The colour drained from Hartley's face. "This is not finished. Fairfax will not accept." "Fairfax has no choice but to accept," Christopher cut him off. "Cecilia is now Duchess of Greymont. Her fortune is secured under her own control. Any attempt to contest our marriage or interfere with her welfare will be met with the full force of my position and influence. Am I making myself clear?" Hartley opened his mouth, then closed it again. After a long moment, he turned and stalked from the room without another word. Lord Fairfax appeared an hour later, his arrival announced by the clatter of hooves on gravel. Christopher insisted Cecilia remain in her chambers while he dealt with the man, but she watched from the window as Fairfax paced the drive, his posture rigid with fury. The confrontation lasted mere minutes. Christopher emerged from the house, spoke several sentences that Cecilia could not hear, and Fairfax's face transformed into a mask of rage. But he departed, whip cracking over his horses, as he drove his phaeton away at dangerous speed. When Christopher returned to find her, his expression was grim. He made threats, vague but unmistakable. "We must remain vigilant." "What did you tell him?" "That you are my wife, under my protection, and any attempt to harm you would be considered an attack upon the Duchy of Graymont itself." Christopher's jaw tightened. "He is a dangerous man, Cecilia. Desperate men do desperate things. But you are safe here. I will ensure it." The first weeks of their marriage established a pattern of careful formality. Christopher insisted Cecilia take the Duchess's chambers, a suite of rooms far grander than anything she had known. Her own sitting room, dressing room, bedchamber, all appointed with luxury that spoke of centuries of wealth. His rooms adjoined hers through a connecting door that remained firmly locked. They took meals together, conversed with polite courtesy, and maintained the appearance of a proper marriage to the household staff. But the ease they had begun to develop in the library before the wedding had vanished, replaced by a stiffness that pained Cecilia more than she cared to admit. She had trapped him. The knowledge sat heavy in her chest during the long, lonely nights. He had offered marriage freely, yes, but what choice had he truly possessed? To refuse would have been to abandon her to Fairfax's cruelty. Christopher was too honourable to have done that. Margaret watched them both with concern, saying nothing but seeing everything. "You are both miserable," she said finally, a week after the wedding, as she helped Cecilia dress for dinner. "I am safe. I am grateful. What more could I ask?" "To be happy," Margaret replied tartly. "He is a good man, Cecilia, and you are a good woman. This wall you have built between you serves no purpose. It serves to protect him from regretting his choice," Cecilia said quietly. "I will not compound his sacrifice by becoming a burden in truth." But as she descended the stairs that evening to join Christopher for dinner, as she saw his face light slightly at her appearance before the shutters came down again, Cecilia wondered whether they were both protecting themselves from something that might, given time and courage, become more than either had bargained for. The invitation arrived 3 weeks after the wedding, an elegant card on heavy cream paper requesting the honour of the Duke and Duchess of Greymont's presence at Lady Waverley's autumn ball. Christopher found Cecilia in the morning room, the invitation lying on the table before her. "We need not attend if you prefer to avoid society," he said carefully. "I can send our regrets." Cecilia looked up from the card, her green eyes troubled. "Will that not raise more questions? Our marriage was unusual enough. If we refuse all invitations, the gossip will only intensify. The gossip matters little to me, but it matters to your position," she countered. "A duke who hides his new duchess away suggests either shame or scandal. I will not be the cause of speculation about your character." And so, a week later, they travelled to Lady Waverley's estate in the Duke's finest carriage. Cecilia dressed in a gown of deep emerald silk that Mrs. Thornbury had commissioned from London's finest modiste. The colour brought out the fire in her hair and the brilliance of her eyes. And when Christopher first saw her descending the stairs at Graymont, he had been momentarily struck speechless. "Will I do?" she had asked, mistaking his silence for disapproval. "You will do very well," he had managed, offering his arm with hands that were not quite steady. The ballroom glittered with candlelight and jewels, the cream of Kent society assembled in their finest. Whispers followed the Duke and Duchess of Greymont's entrance, curious eyes assessing Cecilia with barely concealed interest. Who was this woman who had captured one of England's most elusive bachelors? "Graymont, delighted you could attend." Lord Waverley greeted them warmly. "And this must be the new Duchess. My dear, you are even lovelier than the reports suggested." Cecilia curtsied with perfect grace. "You are too kind, Lord Waverley. Thank you for the invitation." They were immediately surrounded by well-wishers and the curious. Christopher kept Cecilia's hand firmly tucked into his arm, a possessive gesture that did not go unnoticed. She handled the attention with remarkable composure, her responses gracious, but revealing little. He found himself admiring her skill at deflecting intrusive questions with polite vagueness. "You must tell us how you met," Lady Pemberton insisted, her eyes sharp with gossip hunger. Such a whirlwind courtship. We met on the road, Cecilia replied smoothly. Quite by chance. Sometimes fate arranges meetings in the most unexpected ways. When the orchestra struck up a waltz, Christopher knew what was expected. Every eye in the room watched as he led his wife to the dance floor. Her hand trembled slightly in his as they took their positions, and he found himself wanting to reassure her. "You are doing beautifully," he murmured as they began to move. "I feel like a curiosity on display," she whispered back. "You are the most elegant woman in this room. Let them stare." The compliment brought colour to her cheeks. As they moved together across the polished floor, Christopher became acutely aware of every point of contact between them. His hand at her waist, her fingers resting lightly on his shoulder, the rustle of her silk skirts brushing against his legs. She followed his lead perfectly, as though they had danced together 100 times before. "Christopher," she said softly, and the use of his given name sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. "Yes? Thank you for all of this. I know maintaining appearances is difficult when the marriage itself is merely practical. Merely practical." The words struck him oddly. Was that truly all this was? He looked down into her upturned face, at eyes that held gratitude and something else he could not quite name, and felt something shift in his chest. "Cecilia, But whatever he had been about to say was lost as the music swelled and other couples pressed closer around them. The moment passed. The waltz ended. Christopher led Cecilia from the floor, acutely conscious of her hand still resting on his arm, of the lingering sensation of her body moving in perfect synchronization with his own. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite conversation and careful smiles. By the time they departed for Greymont, Christopher's head ached from the strain of pretending that touching his wife affected him not at all, that holding her during the waltz had been merely a social obligation. In the carriage, they sat in silence, the darkness concealing their expressions. Christopher could feel Cecilia's presence beside him, could smell the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair. When they arrived at Greymont, he handed her down from the carriage, released her hand perhaps more quickly than necessary, and murmured something about correspondence that required attention before retiring abruptly to his study. He did not see the confusion and hurt that flickered across Cecilia's face as she watched him disappear. The following days brought a return to their careful formality. They took meals together but spoke little beyond necessities. Christopher buried himself in estate business. Cecilia spent long hours in the library or walking the grounds with Margaret. They were painfully, meticulously polite to one another, and the strain of it showed in tight shoulders and forced smiles. It was Margaret who finally confronted Christopher, finding him in the stables one afternoon as he prepared to ride out. "You are making both of you miserable," she said without preamble. Christopher tightened the girth on his saddle with more force than necessary. "I beg your pardon. Cecilia barely sleeps. She thinks she has trapped you into a marriage you regret. And you, Your Grace, look like a man at war with himself. My marriage is none of your concern, Mrs. Bradford. It is when I watch two people who could be happy choosing instead to be wretched out of some misguided sense of propriety." Margaret's voice softened. "Life is short, Your Grace. I have lived long enough to know that chances at happiness are rare. Do not waste this one out of pride or fear." She left him standing in the stable yard, her words ringing in his ears. The fire started in the kitchens 3 nights later. A pot of grease left too near the hearth. A spark. Flames spreading faster than anyone could have anticipated. By the time the alarm was raised, the entire east wing was filling with smoke. Christopher was in his study when he heard the shouts. He bolted for the door, his first thought immediate and visceral. Cecilia. Her chambers were in the east wing. Servants ran through the corridors with buckets of water. Smoke billowed from the kitchen area, thick and acrid. Christopher took the stairs 3 at a time, his heart pounding with a fear he had not felt since his mother's death years ago. "Cecilia!" he shouted, reaching her door and finding it locked from within. "Cecilia! Open the door!" No response. He could see smoke seeping beneath the doorframe. Without hesitation, Christopher threw his shoulder against the heavy wood. Once, twice, and on the third impact, the lock gave way. The room was thick with smoke, visibility reduced to mere feet. Christopher dropped to his knees where the air was clearer and crawled forward, calling her name. He found her collapsed beside the bed, unconscious but breathing. Relief flooded through him so powerfully it was almost painful. He gathered her into his arms and stood, holding her against his chest as he moved toward the door. She was so light, so fragile in his embrace. The thought of losing her, of failing to protect her, sent terror lancing through him. In the corridor, the air was clearer. Christopher carried Cecilia down the stairs and out into the night air, where servants had gathered in the courtyard. Mrs. Thornbury rushed forward with blankets. "Lay her here, Your Grace. I have sent for the physician." Christopher knelt on the ground, cradling Cecilia's head in his lap, smoothing the hair back from her soot-stained face. "Cecilia, please, open your eyes." Her eyelids fluttered. She coughed, the sound harsh and painful, and then her eyes opened, focusing on his face with confusion. "Christopher, I have you. You are safe now." His voice was rough with emotion he could not contain. "You are safe." The physician arrived within the hour, examining Cecilia thoroughly and pronouncing her fortunate to have escaped with nothing more than smoke inhalation. The fire, meanwhile, had been contained to the kitchen area, thanks to the swift response of the household staff. Damage was minimal, injuries non-existent. Christopher insisted Cecilia be moved to a guest chamber far from the affected wing. He sat beside her bed as the physician administered treatment, holding her hand and refusing to leave even when Mrs. Thornbury suggested he should rest. "I thought I had lost you," he said quietly when they were finally alone, the candles burning low in the unfamiliar room. Cecilia turned her head on the pillow to look at him. "You seemed very calm when you carried me out. I was terrified." The admission came easier than he expected. "When I could not find you in all that smoke, when I thought you might—" He stopped, unable to complete the sentence. "But you did find me. And if I had not, if I had been mere minutes later—" Christopher's hand tightened on hers. "Cecilia, these past weeks, I have been a coward." "What do you mean?" He took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "I have been avoiding you because I am afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of caring too much. Of dishonoring Caroline's memory by developing feelings for another woman. Of proving myself capable of the kind of attachment that eluded me in my first marriage." He looked down at their joined hands. "I told myself our arrangement was practical, that it could remain purely a business transaction. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being merely the woman I married to protect. You became someone whose smile I look forward to, whose conversation I miss when we are apart, whose safety matters to me more than my own." Cecilia's eyes glistened with tears. "I thought I was a burden to you, that you regretted your choice." "Never." Christopher lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You could never be that, but I did not want to force unwanted affection upon you when our agreement was for a marriage of convenience only." Christopher, I've been just as much a coward as you." She sat up slightly, wincing at the movement. "I have spent these weeks trying to make myself invisible, trying not to be a complication in your life. But the truth is, I find myself wanting more than the terms of our arrangement. I want your company, your friendship. I want to know your thoughts and share mine. I want—" She hesitated, then continued softly. "I want you to see me not as an obligation, but as someone who genuinely cares for you." The distance between them seemed to collapse. Christopher found himself leaning closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I do see you. That is precisely the problem. I see you entirely too clearly." "Is that truly a problem?" she whispered. "I am beginning to think it might be the opposite." He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that spoke of tenderness and possibility. Cecilia's hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palm. The kiss deepened slightly, exploratory and sweet, until Christopher pulled back just enough to search her face, his breath still mingling with hers. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "Does it have to? Can it not simply be a natural progression? From a marriage of convenience to something more genuine?" "Society would find that peculiar," Society has found our entire courtship peculiar, Cecilia pointed out. Why should we start caring about their opinions now? Christopher laughed. The sound startled out of him. You make a compelling argument. They sat together in the candlelight, hands still joined, the smoke-scented night air drifting through the open window. The fire had forced them to confront what they had been avoiding. Now, in its aftermath, they faced a choice. Continue their careful distance, or allow themselves to explore what might develop between them. I cannot promise perfection, Christopher said finally. I have spent years in isolation. I may not always say the right things, or know how to show affection appropriately. And I come with enough complications to fill a decade, Cecilia replied. I may never fully recover from the fear Fairfax inspired. I may have nightmares. I may need reassurance you find tedious. Then we shall be imperfect together, Christopher decided. We shall muddle through, making mistakes and learning as we go. And perhaps in time, this marriage of convenience will become something neither of us anticipated. Something better, Cecilia agreed. He kissed her again, and this time when they pulled apart, neither withdrew entirely. Christopher settled into the chair beside her bed, their hands still linked, and for the first time since their hasty wedding, the careful walls between them began, tentatively, to crumble. The night was warm for autumn, a gentle breeze stirring the curtains in Christopher's bedchamber as he prepared to retire. He had just dismissed his valet when a soft knock sounded at the door. Opening it, he found Cecilia standing in the corridor, wrapped in a dressing gown of deep blue silk, her hair loose about her shoulders. Cecilia, he said, surprised. Is something wrong? May I come in? Her voice was steady, but he could see the nervous flutter of her pulse at her throat. He stepped aside, allowing her to enter, then closed the door behind her. She moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit grounds, her fingers twisting together in a gesture he had come to recognize as a sign of internal struggle. I have been thinking, she began, not turning to face him, about what we said after the fire, about allowing ourselves to explore what might develop between us. As have I, Christopher replied carefully, remaining near the door to give her space. We have been dancing around this for weeks now, she continued, sharing meals, taking walks, speaking of inconsequential matters while avoiding what truly concerns us both. Finally, she turned to face him, and the vulnerability in her eyes stole his breath. I do not want to dance anymore, Christopher. I want honesty. I want to know what you feel when you look at me. He closed the distance between them in 3 strides. I feel as though I have been sleepwalking through 4 years of my life, and you have awakened me. I feel gratitude for your presence and terror at how much your welfare matters to me. I feel desire, Cecilia, and affection that grows stronger each day, and a desperate wish that this marriage we entered for purely practical reasons might become something genuine. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she was smiling. Then why do we maintain this distance? Why do we sleep in separate chambers and behave as though we are merely cordial acquaintances? Because I did not wish to presume. Because our agreement was for a marriage in name only. Because I feared imposing unwanted attentions upon you. Christopher, she said softly, reaching up to cup his face with one gentle hand. They would not be unwanted. He kissed her then, no longer gentle and exploratory as their previous kisses had been, but with the full weight of suppressed longing behind it. Cecilia responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Christopher framed her face between his hands, holding her as though she were something fragile and precious. Are you certain? He asked. Once we cross this threshold, there is no returning to what we were before. I do not want to return, she whispered. I want to move forward, with you. What followed was tender and unhurried, Christopher taking great care to ensure her comfort and pleasure. They discovered each other slowly, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. When Cecilia finally fell asleep in his arms hours later, her head resting on his chest, Christopher felt something he had not experienced in years. Contentment, true, uncomplicated happiness. The weeks that followed, brought a transformation to Greymont Hall that even the servants noticed. The Duke smiled more readily. The Duchess laughed often, her face glowing with a radiance that had been absent before. They were seen walking the gardens hand in hand, riding together in the afternoons, sharing quiet evenings in the library with their chairs drawn close together. Margaret visited again, ostensibly to review the household accounts with Mrs. Thornbury, but truly to observe the changes in Cecilia and Christopher. When she saw them together at breakfast, the casual intimacy of Christopher refilling Cecilia's tea without being asked, the way their fingers brushed as he handed her the cup, the genuine affection in their exchanged glances, tears gathered in her eyes. "I am so happy for you, my dear," she told Cecilia later in private. "You deserve this joy." "I never imagined marriage could be like this," Cecilia admitted. "I thought it would always be a matter of duty and obligation. But with Christopher, it is something entirely different. It is partnership and friendship and love, all woven together." Society, too, took notice. Invitations arrived more frequently, everyone eager to observe the Duke and Duchess of Greymont and the obvious transformation their marriage had wrought. The cold, remote Duke had become warmer, more approachable. His devotion to his new Duchess was evident in every gesture. It was during this period of happiness that the letter arrived. Christopher found it among his morning correspondence, recognizing immediately the seal of a London law firm he did not employ. He opened it in his study, and with each line he read, his expression grew darker. "Your Grace," the letter began with false courtesy. "I write on behalf of my client, Lord Edmund Fairfax, regarding a matter of grave legal concern. It has come to our attention that your marriage to Lady Cecilia Hartley, formerly ward of Lord Arthur Hartley, was conducted without proper consent from her legal guardian. As Lady Cecilia had not reached her 30th birthday, and was therefore still under Lord Hartley's custody, the marriage may be subject to challenge on grounds of procedural irregularity. My client intends to petition the ecclesiastical courts for an annulment, should this matter not be resolved to his satisfaction." Christopher read the letter 3 times, his fury mounting with each pass. Fairfax had found a technicality, a potential weakness in the legal foundation of their marriage. While Cecilia had been of age to marry without parental consent, the question of whether a guardian's permission was required for a ward presented a grey area that clever lawyers might exploit. He summoned his solicitor immediately, sending an urgent message to London. Then he found Cecilia in the morning room, where she was writing letters to her sisters. "We have a problem," he said without preamble, handing her Fairfax's letter. He watched the colour drain from her face as she read. "He means to have our marriage annulled. He means to try. Whether he will succeed is another matter entirely." Christopher knelt beside her chair, taking her cold hands in his. "I will not let him take you from me, Cecilia. I will fight this with every resource at my disposal. But if the courts rule in his favour—" Her voice broke. "Christopher, I could not bear to lose this. To lose you." "You will not," he said fiercely. "I promise you, Cecilia. I will not allow it." The following days brought a flurry of legal activity. Christopher's solicitors examined every aspect of the marriage, searching for any weakness Fairfax might exploit. They consulted with ecclesiastical law experts, reviewed precedents, prepared defences. But the more Christopher learned, the more concerned he became. The law regarding guardian consent for adult wards was murky, open to interpretation. "We can argue the case," Mr. Pemberton said grimly during a meeting at Greymont. "But I cannot guarantee success. If Fairfax has secured sympathetic judges, if he presents his case skillfully, there is a genuine risk of annulment." Cecilia, who had insisted on being present for these discussions despite Christopher's desire to shield her, went very still. "Then I should withdraw my consent to the marriage, end it myself before the courts can be involved. It would protect Christopher's reputation." "Absolutely not," Christopher said immediately. "I will not hear of it. But your position, your standing in society, mean nothing compared to you." He grasped her hands across the table. "Cecilia, listen to me. We will find another way. We will fight this, and we will win." "How?" she asked desperately. "If the law itself is against us, then we change the battlefield." Christopher said, a plan beginning to form in his mind. If Fairfax's only claim is legal technicality, we need to make his character the issue instead. We need proof of his crimes, not just rumour and speculation. He turned to Mr. Pemberton. Hire investigators, the best you can find. I want everything about Edmund Fairfax's past examined. His previous marriages, the deaths of his wives, his financial dealings, any connection to corrupt physicians or asylum operators. I want documentation, witnesses willing to testify, hard evidence that will make any judge hesitate to grant his petition. That will be expensive, Your Grace, and time-consuming. I have both money and time, Christopher replied. What I do not have is any intention of losing my wife to a murderer and fortune hunter. The investigators worked swiftly and thoroughly. Within 3 weeks, they began delivering results. A letter from Fairfax to a Dr. Horace Bentley discussing arrangements for a patient who required permanent discretion. Financial records showing that Fairfax's first wife had changed her will mere days before her sudden death, leaving everything to her husband. A former servant from his household, willing to testify that she had seen Fairfax adding powder to his second wife's evening tea in the weeks before that lady's fatal illness. More damning still were the records showing regular payments from Fairfax to Lord Arthur Hartley, beginning 6 months before the engagement to Cecilia was announced. The amounts were substantial, clearly more than mere loans between acquaintances. They painted a picture of deliberate conspiracy, with Arthur selling his niece to Fairfax in exchange for relief from gambling debts. Christopher spread the documents across his desk, satisfaction mingling with disgust as he reviewed them. This was no longer a matter of rumour and suspicion. This was evidence, concrete and damning. We have him, he told Cecilia and Mr. Pemberton when they gathered to review the findings. With this, we can not only defend against his annulment petition, but potentially see him brought up on criminal charges. Will the courts accept this evidence? Cecilia asked, hardly daring to hope. They will have little choice, Mr. Pemberton said, examining the documents with professional thoroughness. These are legal records, signed letters, financial transactions with witnesses, combined with testimony from servants and physicians who will speak under oath. It builds a compelling case for Fairfax's criminal intent regarding you specifically, and his suspicious behaviour regarding his previous wives generally. Christopher pulled Cecilia close, feeling her trembling despite her brave face. It is almost over, he murmured. Soon you will be safe, not just from him, but from any question of our marriage's validity. I should never have doubted you, she said softly. You had every reason to doubt, but I meant what I said, Cecilia. I will not lose you. Not to Fairfax, not to legal technicalities, not to anything. As they prepared for the legal battle ahead, gathering their evidence and witnesses, Christopher felt grimly confident. Fairfax had made a crucial error. In attempting to use the law to separate Christopher from Cecilia, he had exposed himself to investigation. And that investigation had revealed truths that would destroy him far more thoroughly than any annulment could have destroyed their marriage. The stage was set for confrontation. And Christopher Wickliffe, Duke of Greymont, intended to ensure that justice, at long last, would be served. The hearing took place in London on a cold November morning, in the ecclesiastical court chambers that had seen countless marital disputes over the centuries. Christopher and Cecilia arrived together, presenting a united front, despite the anxiety that twisted in both their stomachs. Mr. Pemberton and his team of solicitors carried multiple leather cases filled with evidence, their expressions grimly confident. Lord Edmund Fairfax sat across the chamber with his own legal representation, his face a mask of cold fury. Beside him, Lord Arthur Hartley shifted uncomfortably, his florid complexion suggesting he had fortified himself with drink before attending. The judge, Lord Justice Weatherby, was known for his adherence to strict legal interpretation, which had initially concerned Christopher. But it also meant he would be forced to consider all evidence presented, regardless of social standing. This court is convened to consider a petition for annulment, the judge began, his voice carrying through the panelled chamber. Lord Fairfax contends that the marriage between the Duke of Greymont and Lady Cecilia Hartley, as she was then known, was conducted without proper consent from her legal guardian and is therefore subject to challenge. Lord Fairfax, your solicitor may present your case. Fairfax's lawyer, a thin man with sharp features named Mr. Crenshaw, stood. My lord, the facts are straightforward. Lady Cecilia was under the guardianship of Lord Arthur Hartley at the time of her marriage. She had not reached her 30th birthday and therefore required her guardian's consent for any marriage contract. The Duke of Greymont obtained a special license and conducted the marriage without seeking or receiving such consent. Under ecclesiastical law, this constitutes grounds for declaring the marriage void. And what is your client's interest in this matter? The judge asked pointedly. Lord Fairfax is not the guardian in question. My client had a prior arrangement with Lord Hartley for Lady Cecilia's hand in marriage, Crenshaw replied smoothly. An arrangement that was disrupted by the Duke's precipitous actions. My client seeks only to see proper legal procedures followed. Christopher's solicitor, Mr. Pemberton, rose. My lord, if I may address the court, the petitioner's characterization of events is deliberately misleading. Lady Cecilia was 27 at the time of her marriage, well past the age of majority. While guardianship technically extends until marriage or age 30 for women of property, the law is clear that parental or guardian consent is required only for those under 21 years of age. Lady Cecilia required no such consent. The law regarding adult wards is subject to interpretation, Crenshaw countered. My client believes. Your client's beliefs are irrelevant, Pemberton interrupted. What matters is his motivation for bringing this petition. And that, my lord, is where the true nature of this case becomes clear. He gestured, and his assistants began distributing documents to the judge and to Fairfax's legal team. These are financial records showing regular payments from Lord Fairfax to Lord Hartley, beginning 6 months before Lady Cecilia's betrothal to Lord Fairfax was announced. The amounts are substantial, clearly indicating that Lord Hartley sold his niece's hand in marriage to settle his gambling debts. Lord Hartley half rose from his seat. That is a damnable lie. Sit down, Lord Hartley, the judge said sharply. You will have opportunity to speak when called upon. Pemberton continued, his voice steady. Furthermore, we have correspondence between Lord Fairfax and a Dr. Horace Bentley, discussing arrangements for a patient requiring permanent discretion. The dates of these letters coincide with Lord Fairfax's betrothal to Lady Cecilia. We also have testimony from Mrs. Margaret Bradford, former governess to Lady Cecilia, who will swear under oath that she overheard Lord Fairfax and Lord Hartley discussing plans to have Lady Cecilia committed to an asylum immediately following the wedding, allowing Lord Fairfax to gain control of her substantial inheritance. Fairfax's face had gone white, then red. These are fabrications. Lies concocted by the Duke to justify his theft of my intended bride. Then you will not object to us presenting additional evidence, Pemberton said. We have financial records showing that Lord Fairfax's first wife changed her will days before her sudden death, leaving him her entire fortune. His second wife died under similarly mysterious circumstances, also after recently altering her will in his favour. We have testimony from a former servant who witnessed Lord Fairfax adding unknown powder to his second wife's tea in the weeks preceding her death. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. The judge struck his gavel. Order! Mr. Crenshaw, do you wish to respond to these allegations? Crenshaw had gone pale, clearly blindsided by the extent of the evidence. My lord, these are serious accusations, but they have no bearing on the legal question of guardian consent for marriage. On the contrary, Pemberton said, they have everything to do with it. This petition is not about legal procedure. It is about a fortune hunter who lost access to a substantial dowry when Lady Cecilia escaped a marriage that would have resulted in her confinement and likely her death. Lord Fairfax seeks annulment not for justice, but for revenge and continued pursuit of Lady Cecilia's wealth. I would hear from Lord Hartley, the judge said. You are Lady Cecilia's uncle and former guardian. Did you consent to her marriage to the Duke of Greymont? Hartley stood, swaying slightly. I did not. The marriage was conducted without my knowledge or approval. And did you receive payments from Lord Fairfax as alleged? A long pause. Hartley's face worked as he calculated his options. Finally, he said, "Lord Fairfax assisted me with certain financial difficulties. That does not constitute bribery." "Assisted you how?" the judge pressed. "What were the terms of this assistance?" There were no formal terms. It was a loan between gentlemen. Pemberton produced another document. "This is a promissory note signed by Lord Hartley, agreeing to ensure Lady Cecilia's marriage to Lord Fairfax in exchange for the sum of £5,000. Would you care to explain this, Lord Hartley?" The silence in the chamber was absolute. Hartley seemed to crumple. "I had debts, significant debts. Fairfax offered a solution that benefited all parties." "All parties except Lady Cecilia," Pemberton said quietly. "My lord, I would now like to call Lady Cecilia herself to testify." Cecilia rose on trembling legs, Christopher's steady hand briefly touching hers in support before she moved to stand before the judge. She had dressed simply but elegantly, her bearing that of a duchess, her voice clear despite her fear. "Lady Cecilia," the judge said, not unkindly, "you understand you are under oath." "I do, my lord." "Did you consent freely to your marriage to the Duke of Greymont?" "I did, my lord. The Duke offered me protection when I fled my uncle's household to escape a forced marriage to Lord Fairfax. He acted with complete honour, asking nothing of me beyond what I was willing to give." "And why did you flee?" Cecilia took a steadying breath. "Because I discovered that Lord Fairfax intended to have me declared incompetent and confined to an asylum immediately after our wedding. His plan was to control my inheritance while I was institutionalized. Given what has now been revealed about his previous wives, I believe he would eventually have arranged my death to inherit my fortune completely." "These are wild accusations," Fairfax burst out. "The woman is clearly unstable, as I warned from the beginning." "You will remain silent, Lord Fairfax," the judge said sharply. He turned back to Cecilia. "How did you come to learn of this plan?" "My former governess, Mrs. Margaret Bradford, overheard a conversation between Lord Fairfax and my uncle. She warned me and helped me escape. The Duke offered sanctuary, and when it became clear that my uncle would not cease his attempts to return me to Lord Fairfax's custody, the Duke proposed marriage as a legal means of protecting me. I would hear from this Mrs. Bradford," the judge said. Margaret was called forward, her weathered face set with determination. She recounted what she had overheard, the discussion of physicians prepared to sign commitment papers, the asylum in Yorkshire, Fairfax's cold calculation about how long to wait before arranging Cecilia's death to avoid suspicion. "And you are certain of what you heard?" the judge asked. "Absolutely certain, my lord. I have served the Hartley family for 30 years. I know the difference between misunderstanding and conspiracy. What I heard was conspiracy to defraud and potentially murder Lady Cecilia." By the time Margaret finished her testimony, even Fairfax's solicitor looked ill. Crenshaw stood slowly. "My lord, in light of these revelations, my client wishes to withdraw his petition." "Too late," the judge said coldly. "I have heard sufficient evidence to render judgment. The petition for annulment is denied. The marriage between the Duke and Duchess of Greymont is found to be entirely legal and valid. Furthermore, I am ordering that transcripts of these proceedings be forwarded to the Lord Chancellor and the Metropolitan Police. The allegations regarding Lord Fairfax's conduct toward his previous wives warrant formal criminal investigation." 2 constables, who had been waiting outside the chamber, entered at the judge's signal. "Lord Fairfax, you are to be held for questioning regarding the deaths of your previous wives. Lord Hartley, while you are not being charged at this time, I strongly suggest you remove yourself from London society for the foreseeable future. This court is adjourned." The return journey to Greymont passed in a blur of relief and exhaustion. Christopher held Cecilia close in the carriage, neither speaking, both simply grateful that the ordeal was finally over. When they arrived home, the household staff had somehow learned of their victory and lined up to offer congratulations. The weeks that followed brought a settling into true married life. Cecilia threw herself into the duties of Duchess, reviewing the charitable works that Christopher's mother and late wife had established in the local villages. She funded repairs to the village school, established a small lending library, and created an apprenticeship program for promising young people from tenant families. Christopher watched her bloom into her role with quiet pride. The frightened woman who had hidden in his carriage had transformed into a confident duchess, respected by the tenants and admired by neighboring families. But more than that, she had become his partner in every sense, his companion, his confidant, the person whose presence made every day brighter. Margaret took up permanent residence at Greymont, serving as unofficial advisor to Cecilia and beloved member of the household. She watched the Duke and Duchess together with satisfaction, knowing she had played a small part in preserving a happiness that might otherwise have been destroyed. 6 months after the trial, Christopher and Cecilia hosted their first major social event as an established couple. The Greymont Winter Ball. The house blazed with candlelight, the ballroom filled with the finest families of Kent and beyond. Cecilia, resplendent in a gown of deep blue silk with sapphires at her throat, moved through the crowds with grace and confidence. When the orchestra began a waltz, Christopher claimed his wife's hand, leading her to the center of the floor. As they moved together, he was struck again by how perfectly they fit, how natural it felt to hold her, to move with her, to share this life with her. "You are staring," Cecilia murmured, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "I am admiring my wife," Christopher replied. "Surely that is permitted. More than permitted, encouraged even." As the waltz drew to a close, Christopher did something unprecedented. Rather than simply escorting Cecilia from the floor, he stopped in the center of the room, still holding her hand, and addressed their assembled guests. "My friends, if I might have your attention for a moment." The ballroom quieted, curious faces turning toward them. "When I married Cecilia, it was ostensibly a marriage of convenience and protection. What I did not anticipate was that convenience would become joy, that protection would become partnership, and that duty would transform into the deepest love I have ever known." He turned to Cecilia, whose eyes had filled with tears. "You are my heart, Cecilia, my happiness, the answer to questions I did not know I was asking, and I wanted everyone here to know it." The ballroom erupted in applause. Cecilia, laughing and crying simultaneously, rose on her toes to kiss him. Propriety be damned. The guests cheered even louder. That night, as they prepared for bed in Christopher's chambers, which had become their shared domain, Cecilia caught Christopher's hand and placed it against her abdomen. "I have something to tell you," she said softly. "Dr. Harrison confirmed it yesterday. We are going to have a child." Christopher stared at her, joy and wonder flooding through him. Truly, truly, by next summer, there will be an heir to Greymont. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were the most precious thing in creation, which to him she was. A year later, in the nursery at Greymont Hall, the Duchess of Greymont sat in a rocking chair, cradling her infant son while her husband looked on with undisguised adoration. Margaret stood nearby, having just finished singing a lullaby that had once soothed baby Cecilia. "He has your eyes," Christopher observed, touching one tiny fist. "And your stubborn chin," Cecilia replied, smiling. "Poor child." "He will be magnificent," Christopher said confidently. "With you as his mother, how could he be otherwise?" As Cecilia looked around the nursery, at her husband's loving face, at Margaret's proud expression, at her sleeping son, she thought back to that terrified girl who had hidden in a carriage, running from a nightmare. She had fled seeking merely survival and found instead a family, a purpose, a love that transformed everything. Sometimes the road to happiness began with desperate courage. Sometimes sanctuary appeared in the most unexpected places. And sometimes, when you ran from the life others had planned for you, you discovered the life you were always meant to have. Outside, snow began to fall softly over the grounds of Greymont Hall, blanketing the estate in peaceful white. Inside, the Duke and Duchess of Greymont, with their son and their chosen family, were home at last.